So hello and welcome to the account-based virtual workshop. I am Justin Gray of LeadMD, CEO and founder of LeadMD, and today we'll be talking about the anatomy of a successful account-based everything play. We at LeadMD have started calling account-based marketing account-based everything simply to loop in the other aspects of the organization, which we believe are absolutely critical to the success of account-based marketing / everything. So today let's go ahead and dive into what I believe is one of the largest aspects of account-based everything, and those are the plays that we are going to run around accounts in order to penetrate those accounts, educate the buyer, and move that account along the buyer's journey. Before we hop into that, however, let's talk a little bit about why I'm talking to you today. LeadMD is a marketing automation, CRM, and sales enablement agency. We've conducted just over 3,000 implementations of Marketo, Salesforce.com, and most recently Engagio. Our team is entirely focused on those platforms, and we do nothing but operationalizing best practice process for marketing and sales around those platforms. So in terms of account-based everything, let's talk a little bit about what that is to start off with, and I'll cover just some of the main tenets that we've come to define this powerful go-to-market strategy through. And we see those here. Ultimately, there are 5 core tenets, and then we're going to wrap all of our supporting tech stack around these tenets. So everything from our database, and if you talk to, I hope, anyone at this point about account-based marketing / everything, they're going to begin with the database, your target account list, made up of both accounts and buying committees at those accounts, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. And then ultimately, the process that ensues is much different than the traditional demand gen process. And so there's a lot of opportunity here, both within this virtual workshop and afterward, for the attendees to educate themselves about these other core tenets and better determine how they can indoctrinate account-based marketing and everything into their organization and their go-to-market strategy. I'll go through these next areas fairly briefly. Planning, where we're learning more about who the buyers within the account are and the account itself. This is one of the areas that traditionally has fallen on sales and has taken place after they received a quote-unquote MQL or marketing qualified lead. Within account-based everything, that happens right up front, right after database assembly. We'll then, of course, understand more about our personas, account personas, and buyer personas, and understand what that buying committee is going to look like. Next in the process, the content that we'll formulate to engage those accounts and buyers. And then ultimately, what we'll talk about most today is execution. And more specifically, execution through playbooks. And finally, we will get into measurement just a little bit as we explore how to best track the success of these plays that we'll go through here today. So this diagram should look pretty familiar to anyone who has a marketing, certainly a demand gen background. For the last 2 decades, really, we've been focused in marketing on generating marketing qualified leads. And technology has given rise to a high degree of operationalization and automation of those processes. Practices like lead scoring and lead nurturing have really given way to the notion that there is a ton of online behavior. We need to capture that behavior. We need to capture that lead eventually, and then we need to nurture and score that lead as they interact with both our web properties and our individuals. And eventually, we will form what we believe to be a complete picture of that lead, that prospect, through behavioral and demographic scoring. And that has worked pretty well through the early adopter phase of what I would call the engagement economy or marketing automation, where a large part of our buying process happens online. And when we're ready to buy, we should naturally want to speak to an individual that can facilitate that process. Facilitating that process is really where the crux of that sentence lies. So sales has been training themselves, or a lot of what our sales organizations have been focused on is understanding who the buyer is and how they can best drive that buyer's journey towards their solution. Again, this is a very, very common model. However, the results of which have definitely deteriorated here within the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years as we've started to become inundated with both content and messaging and the buyer has really started to expect a different type of sales approach. And at the root of this problem lies the fact that our online behavior, and even behavior that we are going to invoke or exhibit at trade shows or within meetings, is not the complete picture. And so I liken this to the Plato's cave allegory, to where we're looking at these lead interactions. Sales and marketing are handling their independent places within that journey, marketing up front, sales at that baton pass. And they're recording these interactions and trying to make sense of, what is this person interested in? What should we follow up with from a messaging and a content perspective? And when are they going to buy? However, like the allegory, we're seeing only a piece of that picture. And in reality, there are a lot of other aspects to that buyer's journey, and what that buyer needs to feel educated, indoctrinated, and just comfortable. They need to feel trust with the organization and, of course, the individuals that they're interacting with that organization. And we simply can't do that based on these very one-dimensional lead interactions alone. We have to stop watching that show. We have to step out into the light, if you will. And we're talking about that today through the lens of account-based everything. This does apply to demand generation, however. Important to make that note. However, if you've got a large ASP or ARR, anything above 25K on the annual, account-based everything is really that reality. And so as we transition into the account-based everything mindset, let's lay the groundwork for this presentation with a couple important definitions. The first is a new one, or at least relatively new, an account persona. So an account persona is what I would liken to the traditional view of a buyer persona. We've been establishing these stereotypical summaries of buyers for quite some time. And a lot of people have made a lot of money and done a lot of work around going deep into buyer persona work. And I don't take away from that work. I think it's important work. The problem is most buyer personas are never operationalized. They sit in a great presentation or PDF, or I've even seen really creative cutouts and cereal boxes with personas on them and so on. That is not helpful to the sales team. It tends to be a marketing only asset. And as a result of that, so we have the opportunity at this point to shed some of the old notions around buyer personas and move into what we are now calling account personas. Account personas are really those stereotypical summary groupings of what we call a buying committee. And they're based on the firmographic and organizational makeup of the account to which they belong. What that really just means is, normally there is a couple demographic pointers that you can look at and determine the type of account persona you're going to be selling into. For instance, if we have an early stage, high growth organization, 250 employees or less, they are more likely to have a smaller account persona, a smaller buying committee within that account. And therefore, we can apply that logic in bulk. As we're looking at our target account list, we can begin to group them based on sometimes number of employees, sometimes annual revenue, sometimes the maturity of the organization. It depends on the specific levers for your industry and your organization. However, we should always be able to come up with these summaries to help our sales team and our marketing team better understand the go-to-market strategy around that particular account. And of course, the more that you understand about these personas and the way that these buying committees buy, the better results you're going to have, because you're going to be more prepared and you're going to receive fewer curveballs late in the game. If you know there's going to be a procurement officer involved within your mid-market and your enterprise persona, you can anticipate that. You can take actions accordingly. You can start to loop that individual into the buying process. I'll review the contract, ensure that they're up to speed in terms of what the value proposition is to the business user or the decision maker. That way, we avoid these surprises that a lot of us have been encountering within the demand gen process, because we've been so single-threaded until we get to a late stage negotiation. So an account persona is really a way for us to take that singular notion of a buyer persona and expand it into the true way that accounts purchase these days. And if you're like most organizations, most B2B SaaS organizations, modern marketing organizations, you're starting to see more and more individuals with insight into that buying process. No longer are we relying on one champion to drive us across the finish line. So with that in mind, this next slide really represents the grouping of those account personas within what we call our ideal customer profile. So the ideal customer profile, many are familiar with this term at this point, that's really the unique buyer, our best buyer that we're going to be selling into. And really that should be how we're assembling our target account list. And of course, there's an entire process to determining who your best buyers are by process of interview, looking at past data, looking at won opportunities, and our best customers. There's aspects like customer acquisition costs, lifetime value that have to come into that ICP definition. The most important aspect is once we've done all of that research, we want to ensure that we go a level deeper. We take a look at who the account personas are, and we begin to group them together so that we can anticipate the buying committee once, prior to even getting into that mid or late stage deal. So this is a representation actually of LeadMD's account personas. We have 3 of them. One is high growth, one's mid-market, one's enterprise. And you can see the number shift as we begin to move from A, B, and C here, simply because those committees get larger within that enterprise deal cycle for us. Again, this requires a bit of research to determine how your account and buying committees look. So once we've assembled those buying committees, and really the reason why these are so important as we talk about plays and the notion of playbooks is because we're going to define the roles within those buying committees, and we're going to determine how we need to engage each one of those individuals in order for joint success. The buyer and the buying committee need to understand and trust and be educated on how your solution is going to drive revenue, drive success within their business. And we need to understand how the organization is going to evaluate us, what their biggest pain points are, how we're going to solve those, and then ultimately establishing that close plan. So this graph is really showing that target amount of account engagement at each level. And again, this will be slightly different for each organization. However, the important part to take away from this is that each member of the buying committee needs to be engaged within this threaded account plan that we'll get into here. So I want to give the example. So finally, we're through all of our baseline information here, which is great. So let's get right into talking about how to structure a play. And I want to do this from the perspective of an actual sales play that we run. And I hate that I just called it a sales play because it really conjures up a bunch of feeling about this is sales running this engagement, but that's not how we think about sales plays. We truly think about them in a threaded way across the organization, and that's our best practice and really the account-based everything best practice. So no longer is marketing simply a function of marketing, no longer is sales a baton pass. It truly is a highly distributed joint go-to-market effort. And so with that, let's talk about a first meeting play here. Traditionally, first meeting plays have been post-baton pass. MQL comes across, some sort of SDR organization, or perhaps even the account executive directly reaches out to book that first conversation. So with a limited number of accounts that we're narrowing down through account-based everything, and traditionally a rep is going to be dealing with 25 to 100 accounts based on your addressable market, your ideal customer profile, and the depth at which your sales occurs. So we're narrowing that focus quite a bit. Traditionally, that would be a bad month in terms of MQLs. If we were to talk about the number of 25 to 100 leads to speak to within a month, that would normally be a bad month for most folks in B2B SaaS. Within account-based everything, that's a year. We're talking about planning into these accounts on a quarterly basis and talking to 25 to 100 accounts on a yearly basis. Big mentality shift. So now we've filtered out all of that noise. So now that we can really focus on our best buyer on our terms. We're not relying on them to fill out a form, to attend a webinar, or to download an ebook. We're going to market with a concerted effort to engage these buyers. So this first meeting play should be completely different than a cold email saying, hey, it looks like you conducted some activity on our website. Would you like to talk? That's not good enough in account-based everything. So number one, our first meeting play has to capture enough interest to encourage a meeting. And most of these first meeting plays will come not on the heels of a buyer activity. It will come on the heels of account planning within our organization. Big shift there as well. Number two, it has to drive enough value so that the prospect suddenly takes this call out of nowhere. The whole notion of quote unquote cold calling, or in this case, high value selling into these accounts, is based on the fact that that prospect's going to walk away from the meeting wanting more. They want to understand that they're going to understand that we have absolutely understood the needs of their organization and we're not wasting their time. Incredibly important. So high value, that's a variable notion. So let's define it a little bit more. Traditionally, we're asking for that buyer's time. Normally, this would be 45 minutes to an hour and a half based on the type of solution that you're selling. I hate those emails that ask for 15 minutes. I don't know what we're going to talk about in 15 minutes other than the fact that you wasted my time. So to deliver high value, we need some time on the calendar. And with that, the old messaging around, hey, want to see a demo is not going to be applicable within this process. A demo is an unpaid, it's an unsolicited advertisement. Why would your prospect look to watch a demo with their free time? And even if they do, again, it's an unsolicited advertisement. It's the equivalent of watching a commercial on television. You don't really have to do it any longer. You normally do it if you find that type of content interesting, and afterward you feel very little more compelled to buy than you would previously. You've just eaten up a lot of time and money from the advertiser who spent good money on that ad. Same principle in delivering a demo. This is an expensive touch point, and it's not appropriate for a high value touch. What is appropriate? So with this example, we're going to focus on what we've generalized as a custom research report, but I'm also going to talk from a lot of client processes that we put in place in terms of like what this custom research report evolves into. I'd also liken it to a sales offer. This is something high value, little value to the offering organization, high value to the offered individual or buying committee. So this is a stat from research and advisory firm Topo, in which they look at the presence of high value first touch meeting plays and attribute those plays to their yield. 49% penetration into target accounts within 2 years, 26% lift on touch patterns and SQL conversion rates. We haven't abandoned the SQL. It's still very present. It's simply a stage within the buyer's journey and less of an acceptance from marketing. In fact, it's no longer an acceptance from marketing. It is, we've done our job at this point, let's bring them into a new stage of messaging. And then 21% of first meetings converting to a larger stakeholder meeting. That's the biggest stat here for me. When you're assembling a list of 25 to 100 accounts and you're looking to go into those accounts, research them, and convert them to the next stage in the buyer's journey, if we can do that at a rate of at least 21% as a result of this play, that's a huge value add. So again, here's Topos framework that they put out around these high value first touch meetings. A ton of discovery. That can be sales asking questions, that can be research online, that can be fact finding with marketing, that can be workshops, that can be any sort of entry point there where we're able to gather information about the customer. For many of you with account-based everything processes and frameworks that are selling to an extremely low number of account organizations, we've worked with organizations that work with as few as 20 total target customers. This tends to happen in a continual motion. That account executive is absolutely charged with getting into those accounts, knowing them, managing them year over year, and then creating these high value plays. So ultimately, once that custom content or campaign is created, then we're going to distribute that amongst a multitude of touch points. So here's our play example that I want to run through. So this custom content play, again, in relation to this high value research deliverable, I'm going to use this, actually the LeadMD example through this. So ultimately, within our go-to-market ABE process, we have SDRs that are reaching out in conjunction with marketing and engaging with strategic members of the organization. And then we are capturing either through their website, through other online research, or through direct interface with a practitioner, data points that can allow us to assemble a high value analysis. And that report is what we call our benchmark report. Each year we roll all the results from that benchmark up and we distribute it as our marketing maturity report, which is the holy grail of marketing stats as it relates to our sales process. So essentially we're evaluating that organization, we're giving them a free, in-depth, high-value report on how they stack up against best practices. And so this particular content play is broken down into what I call the 5 W's. Number one, the who. And I've used actually the Engagio interface to illustrate this here because I think it frankly does the best job of breaking down the aspects of a play. Across the top of the screen here, we see a couple different tabs. I'm currently on the Players tab. So again, if we rewind to the slide I showed on the account planning aspect to account-based everything, where we're assembling that database, and then we look at that through the account personas and profiles aspect, this is where that comes in handy. As we're mapping into that particular account, I'm going to want to know who on our team is engaging and who on their team is engaging. Who's aligned to whom? How are we going to message to those individuals? What are our touch points here that are going to be important? That buying committee is so critical at this stage. The next step is, of course, conducting the research, the value mining, and establishing the what. We're going to get our arms around everything that we can gather around that organization. We're going to find our value. We're going to find where they can do better. We're going to assemble that into our report. And again, the Engagio interface here allows me to stipulate that via a checklist. So an SDR would normally go through this process. Have we built everyone out in CRM? Have we mapped the account teams to our players? Have we conducted our research and sent some personal LinkedIn information here as part of our process? Along the bottom there, as you can see that little progressive bar, I'm past the who, I'm into the what, and then of course I'm going to determine the when. So the message, when am I going to send that invite to this first value, high value touch point? Who's going to send that? What are we going to advertise? Here we're advertising our marketing maturity report, and then we're offering the ability to have a very quick intro, and then as a result of this, we book that hour-and-a-half deep dive. So this is essentially the outcome of this first meeting is to determine, are you the right person to talk to? If not, who is? Here is the type of information that I will need to gather to give you this free report, and can we book that ultimate meeting? And so, of course, this initial message is incredibly important, and again, facilitated through this play framework. Ultimately, now we're going to discuss the where. Where are we going to distribute this messaging? So we're actually assuming at this point that we've booked that particular meeting and we've gathered these some of these touch points, and now we want to go deeper into this and really assemble the full report. So I mentioned those touch points for us don't have to happen directly with the individual. They can also happen by evaluating the site, by walking through their demand gen process. We fill out a lot of forms on the organization site. We determine the follow-up. We look at how they treat us. A lot of that audit is always going on in the background, and because we have account executives aligned to these accounts in a very limited number, they're able to give that type of specific attention to these organizations. So ultimately, where are we going to distribute that message? Emails, obviously, a no-brainer. This step is actually a call, place a call out to the organization. There's social, there's print mail, which we also use. So that this message is distributed amongst many channels here. And then ultimately, the whammy, the one I love the most, which is threading these plays. Up until this point, we've used a fairly singular point of contact in the eyes of the client, the SDR. Now we're going to thread that through the organization. We're going to take our consulting directors, we're going to align those within their organization. I'm going to be involved and engaged at the executive level, whoever's playing that role, whether it be a VP, C-level individual, CEO. We're going to start sharing these results in bite-sized snippets based on the message that's going to resonate the most with that particular contact. So this is the new aspect here. You know, not only are we going to come to market with a high value who, what, when, where, but ultimately we're going to use a threaded approach, meaning that we're going to engage with multiple different contacts, establish multiple different areas of alignment, and give them messages that are tailored specifically to them. That's the crux of an account-based everything play. And so being able to distribute this all through one system that's looking at your database, looking at your account teams, looking at your personas that you've been able to develop, and creating a very personalized message and distributing that is absolutely the key to success in these high-value first meetings. So in this example, my reach out is actually twofold. It's an email and a LinkedIn reach out, which is actually predetermined for me, but then I'm required to personalize that in strategic areas. And there's even a print and mail play that I can run on high-value accounts that sends out a really nice, cool wrapper for this benchmark report. So I want to talk a little bit about outcomes here. I know that we're running short on time, but the two main outcomes that I would point everyone to within this process are the measure of coverage. And this is, again, a heat map of that coverage. How many, so if we're looking at that high value, and this example is more enterprise, so let's focus on that. If I'm looking at that enterprise account profile, how well has my team done at building out all the players on the account side, on the prospect side of the house? Where are we weak on coverage? Where do we need to shore that up? So ultimately, by looking at these coverage maps, you can be very effective in determining how well are we positioned over at organization ABC versus organization XYZ. And absolutely every time, if we look at a deal that slips or a deal that we lose, it all comes down to coverage for us. Were we aligned at the right level? Because we shouldn't be getting that late stage in the game and have the rug pulled out from under us if we've done our job at aligning the members of the organization correctly to the account team committee and buying committee. And then the second measure is engagement. So once we've assembled those account personas and buying committees, how well are we actually engaging them? And I do think that, here's where the notion of lead score or engagement score is incredibly powerful. I'm actually, again, showing the Engage You interface because that's who we partner with and use for this measurement. But the notion of time that they use is a really interesting one. And frankly, we're early days in terms of measuring time as a method of engagement. But when you start to think about the time spent at a meeting or a dinner as it compares to the time reading an ebook, it makes a lot of sense. So we're able to associate time to those specific activities, measure them, and then multiply them based on the job title that we're actually engaged with during that activity. So a C-level individual at a booth is going to be worth much more to your organization than perhaps a practitioner at that specific stage in the game. And so ultimately what this equates to is a truly threaded approach. If we rewind back to that baton pass graph where marketing is warming up the lead, passing it over to sales, sales goes and does their thing, maybe they recycle it. This is a much different go-to-market strategy where really all aspects of the organization are going to market together, conducting their strengths, but also distributing their strengths into other threads as well. Sales is going to do a little bit of marketing. Executives are going to do a little bit of marketing. Marketing is going to do a little bit of sales. These cross-functional skills are really what we see in the biggest demand in today's SDR sales and marketing teams. Can they conduct their activities that are going to be high value, high result through a multi-threaded lens? And so as we're going to market together, no longer are we passing MQLs and SQLs. We're really talking about marketing qualified accounts. And have they approached the stage of sales accepted? Are they ready to move to that next stage in the buyer's journey? If not, we've got to continue running these plays until they are. And so ultimately, that is how you go to market and engage through plays with an account-based everything model. And ultimately, we got right down to the anatomy of each one of those 5 W's. This presentation will, of course, be available to everyone who's attended the virtual workshop. And if you'd like to learn more about account-based marketing, you can, of course, visit leadmd.com/marketplace. We give all of this stuff available for free. The Prezzo will also be up there in a SlideShare format that you can consume. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining here today, talking about the anatomy of a successful account-based everything play. And I hope you'll join us over at leadmd.com/marketplace to continue the conversation. Thank you.